Hello, my name's Tracy Jackson. I'm a speech and language therapist with over 30 years of experience of working with individuals with eating and drinking difficulties in a range of care settings and with a range of clinical conditions. So today we're going to take a look at some wheat biscuits, some instant porridge and Apetito's Puréed Porridge to see how they compare with the criteria. So here we have Apetito's Puréed Porridge, and we're going to test it against the level 4 IDDSI criteria. So first of all, we want to look at it. Is it smooth? And we need to stir before serving. So let's just give that a little stir. That's looking quite smooth. I can't see any obvious lumps. And also importantly, there's no separate liquid. The next thing we want to do is to just take a fork and see if we can draw a little pattern across the top, and that will tell us that there's no skin or edges to the porridge. So we're just going to do that now. And you can see there's some that leaves a nice indentation, nice pattern there. We also want to make sure that it's not too loose and too runny by just putting some on the fork and making sure that there's nothing dripping through the tines of the fork and that it's sitting in a nice shape on top, which that is actually doing there. The other test that we need to do to make sure that it's not too sticky is to do the spoon flick test, where we put a little bit on the spoon and then we will just flick some off onto the plate and see what's left on the spoon. It is a porridge consistency, so sometimes we find it will be a little bit stickier. So you can see there's a little bit of residue, but there's no large lumps left on there. The other thing that I always feel is really important as well is to actually just taste the food, just test it yourself for the texture to make sure that it feels smooth in the mouth and that it doesn't require any chewing and it doesn't require excessive tongue pressure for it to be cleared out of the mouth. So I'm just going to take a spoonful. And that cleared really easily. I didn't require any effort. It didn't feel sticky. And there's no granulations in there. It has a very smooth texture. So I would say that this passes all of the criteria on the IDDSI test for level 4 pureed. Here we have a smooth instant porridge, and we're going to perform the same IDDSI tests on this as we did the Apetito Puréed porridge. Looking at whether or not it's very smooth, I can see there's already some granulations. I can sort of identify some specific small sort of lumps in there, and albeit them small, they're still there. So it does leave a little bit of a pattern on there, so we know it's not too runny, and there's no separate liquid in there either. So again, it's sitting on the fork. It's not actually dripping through. That's staying there and largely holding its shape, so it's not too runny. Let's try the spoon flick test. So that's got some residue on there, and I can see some granulations within that as well. I think there's quite a lot of residue on that. And I'm definitely having to do some chewing to clear that from my mouth. So although it looks as though it could be almost a level 4, it's actually not meeting those criteria. I am having to manipulate that food in my mouth to clear it from my mouth and to trigger a swallow. I think overall, I'd say that's not fully compliant with all of the IDDSI criteria for level 4 pureed. And here we have a wheat biscuit, which has been prepared with warm milk. I can already see that looks quite sticky. It's coming away in quite separate, sort of large lumps. And the texture on the surface looks quite grainy and lumpy to me. It leaves a bit of a pattern, but it's quite draggy. It's a little bit uneven, which might suggest that there are some lumps in there. We can see it's quite solid. We can see it's quite solid on the fork, and it's certainly not dripping through. That has come off reasonably well. I think it's quite heavy, but it has left some lumps, and you can see a little bit that's just hanging down from there, which would suggest it's quite solid. That feels quite heavy and quite sticky, clear from the mouth. If my tongue movement was very weak, I think I'd struggle to actually swallow that. And I've been left with quite a residue in my mouth as well. So because of the great granulation and that stickiness, it feels quite heavy. I would say that's not really compliant with an IDDSI Level 4 pureed dish. Breakfast options for people on a texture-modified diet can be limiting and can be a bit challenging. So today we looked at some of those options. What we found was that wheat biscuits and the instant porridge were not as compliant as the apetito pureed porridge because they had more granulation, quite lumpy, were more sticky, and didn't clear as easily in the mouth. And at the end of the day, they're not actually designed to be texture-modified foods. So we can't necessarily say with any confidence that we could use them for texture-modified Level 4 pureed. Whereas the apetito pureed porridge was smoother, it cleared readily in the mouth and didn't leave any residue. Offering the apetito pureed porridge gives carers the confidence that they're offering a breakfast that is the right consistency, it's safe, it's nutritious, and it takes the guesswork out of providing a breakfast for residents.